He was one of the most wonderful people I've ever met. Teenage angst, young love, Romeo and Juliet, and we've seen these incredibly dark outcomes.
And then she told me, I put a baseball bat in the back door for you.
There was 2 barefoot feet sticking 90 degrees up in the air from a trash can.
Michael Morin is not the person who killed my father. I was.
You know, somebody's telling you you're going to kill your dad and shoot him in the head, and all you can do is giggle?
This thing reaches too far. They make a giggle into a conspiracy. Published very pleased.
I'm here today in Altamont Springs, Florida, a peaceful suburb just outside of Orlando. Behind me is the apartment complex where Stephen Schulhoff lived with his 16-year-old daughter, Courtney. It's also where Stephen died, bludgeoned to death within earshot of Courtney, who, depending upon who you believe, was either fearful for her own life or the manipulative mastermind behind her father's murder.
Courtney was very bubbly, very cute, little tiny thing, and she was a good kid, going through a bad time, doing the best she could.
We spoke with a woman who got to know Courtney while renting a room from Courtney's father, Stephen. She agreed to talk with us on the condition we not show her face.
It was probably about 8 months that I lived there. I could see after a while that Courtney was having a hard time, and a lot of times I'd get up and she would still be in bed, you know, missing school.
Courtney's parents got divorced. That had a profound impact on her. She was really upset with her parents. She had grown up in the house. She refused to leave the house.
Her parents had sold the family home after their divorce, but she kept going back, breaking in and spending time there when she wasn't staying with her father. It was around that time that Courtney would meet a young man and forever alter the course of both of their lives. Courtney was a freshman here at Timber Creek High School when a mutual friend introduced her to Michael Morin.
Michael was a senior at the time. He was really the big man on campus. He was the captain of the football team, very charismatic, very popular.
So the first time I met Mike, he came to see Courtney. I answered the door. He's, you know, very tall guy, very good-looking kid, very well-spoken. Yes, sir, no, sir, very courteous. Didn't get any bad vibes off from him whatsoever.
Even though Michael Morin's life may have seemed perfect to his high school friends, there was trouble under the surface.
Michael's parents, too, had been through a nasty divorce, and a few years earlier, his mother had a stroke that left her on life support.
So you have Michael and Courtney both in very intense emotional situations in their own lives. Michael feels strongly protective of Courtney, and, you know, that's a dynamic that really creates a very intense relationship between the two.
The two soon became inseparable, clinging to each other for protection from the gathering storms in each of their personal lives. As their relationship became more intense, Michael left his house and began spending more and more time with Courtney at her old family home, where the two also began doing drugs.
Courtney begins to max out her father's credit cards. She begins to write checks on her father's accounts. She and Michael start stealing things, and things finally come to a head when they steal a car.
The car was owned by Michael's dad, Michael Morin Sr., who reported it stolen. The police arrested Michael, and he was charged with grand theft auto.
That's a significant charge, of course, and he could have faced jail for that. Instead, though, he gets a suspended sentence, gets to check in with a parole officer, and gets a house arrest. But whose address does he give for the house arrest? Stephen Schulhoff's, Courtney's dad's.
Meanwhile, Michael Morin Sr. and Stephen Schulhoff meet to discuss what to do about their children. They both agree Courtney is too young for Michael and that they are a bad influence on each other.
And so the two fathers decide that there's only one solution to this problem. They forbid Michael and Courtney from seeing each other again. Teenage angst, young love, Romeo and Juliet. And we've seen time and time again these incredibly dark outcomes.
Steve's girlfriend was worried. It was 3 p.m. and she'd been calling his cell all day. So she drove over to his apartment to see if he was okay. When she got here, a man wearing one of Steve's pink polos and walking his dog caught sight of her and took off. Elaine recognized Michael and later told police she then saw Courtney in front of the apartment. And when she questioned Courtney about her dad's whereabouts, Courtney stated she did not know. Elaine attempted to open the apartment door, but it was locked. That's when she saw both Michael and Courtney flee from the area and later called 911.
The officer that responds to this 911 call enters the apartment, starts looking around, and steps into the bedroom, not expecting what he finds. This incredibly gory crime scene. He speaks with Elaine, and based on her account, it's clear who officers are looking for, and the manhunt begins for Courtney and Michael.
After a short chase, Michael Morin was arrested inside the theater behind me near the mall where he and Courtney had spent hours together before the murder. Michael was brought here to the Altamont Springs Police Department where he was interviewed by detectives. He initially denied knowing why he had been arrested until investigators told him that if he didn't start talking, the question is, do you face a needle or do you face time? Michael then proceeded to tell police what he said had happened. He said it all began when Stephen found out Michael had been staying at the apartment.
The two get into a huge altercation, and Courtney gets kicked out of her home. She meets with Michael later that night at a park near their home, and she tells Michael that her father beat her up, that he grabbed her by the throat, slammed her head down on the tile floor.
She wanted me to kill her down. I tried every way possible to convince her to change her mind on this. She wouldn't. After sitting in front of BP, we walked back to her apartment, and she said she wanted to get stuff set up. I waited over by the tennis courts, and then she told me, I put a baseball bat at the back door for you. And I was like, what's a baseball bat for? She's like, well, just hit him.
Michael says that the two went into the apartment around 2 in the morning. Once they got inside, Michael says Courtney handed him the bat, which he took and walked into Stephen's bedroom. The next thing he remembers, he was looking at the mirror and staring at himself in the face. When he looked down, he saw the bat on the floor in a pool of blood.
When we went to the bedroom, I don't remember going to the bedroom. I don't remember entering the apartment. I remember her handing me a bat. And then I remember standing in front of the mirror, just washing my face.
Michael says he remembers sitting down at a couch in the living room and Courtney bringing him a beer.
She was like, I can't believe you did it. She's like, I never thought you were really going to do it.
He said that when he sat down on the couch and began sobbing, Courtney comforted him and said, "What's wrong, baby? We can finally be together."
She told me, she's like, well, we need to hurry up and get this taken care of and get rid of the body. So I went back in there and we started cleaning it.
The room was dark, so Michael flipped on the lights. What he saw made him so sick that he ran to the toilet and threw up.
It was everywhere. What was it, just blood? Yeah. You see it.
Meanwhile, police were already questioning Courtney. After she and Michael split up and fled the murder scene, Courtney made her way here to the Altamont Springs Police Department and turned herself in. But her story to the police differed drastically from Michael's. According to Courtney, her father had gotten angry after learning that Michael had been staying at the apartment. Courtney told police that he grabbed me by the throat and threw me into the tile and started slapping me around, telling me that I was a slut. When Courtney told Michael what her father had done, she said he became enraged. She said, Mike was telling me that he had an idea and asked her, "Do you have a baseball bat?" She told him there was one in her dad's truck, but asked why. Courtney said she tried to stop Michael after he grabbed it and went inside. Courtney said, "I told him don't do anything and leave him alone and to get out of the apartment, but he wouldn't leave." She said that after she returned from walking her dad's dog Chase, Michael was waiting for her on the porch. He's like, "Come here, I already solved the problem." And I said, "What problem?" And then he told me what he did. Michael said if I called the police, he was going to kill me too. Based on their statements to police, Courtney and Michael were both arrested and charged with first-degree murder. It was up to the jury now to decide who the real mastermind was behind Stephen's brutal killing. When we return, Courtney Schulhoff goes on trial for helping her boyfriend Michael carry out the brutal murder of her father, Stephen. The trial of Courtney Schulhoff for the murder of her father got underway here in late September of 2006. She was only 16, but if found guilty, would spend the rest of her life behind bars without the possibility of parole.
The prosecutors in this case were Jim Carter and Jerry Jones. Now, these guys are well seasoned. They have a couple of decades of experience between them.
For the prosecution, the facts of the case were simple.
On February 10th, Michael Morin beat Stephen Schulhoff with a baseball bat until he was dead. And he did this in a concerted effort with Courtney Schulhoff. Michael Morin is the person who actually killed him. There's no question about that. But the evidence also going to show you that Courtney participated. She encouraged. She did acts in furtherance of getting this act done. Her actions were so inconsistent with innocence and just pointed, to guilt all over the place. And as such, when the conclusion of the case, the state's going to ask you to find her guilty of first-degree murder. Thank you.
The real challenge for the prosecution is to show that Courtney was an active participant in planning and carrying out this murder, because she's been telling the police that she had nothing to do with it, that Michael was the one that came up with and executed this plan. And remember, she is sitting at the defense table, a 16-year-old innocent-looking girl, so they have to really convince the jury that this girl is capable of coming up with this devious plan and going through with it.
The prosecution first called Elaine Bauk, Stephen Schulhoff's girlfriend, to the stand.
Will you please state your name for the record?
Her testimony is crucial because she's the one that places both Courtney and Michael at the scene after this event, and she's the one that called 911. Elaine also becomes incredibly emotional even before she speaks on the witness stand.
Elaine Bauk.
Okay. If we could just have the lights touch, just. This is the person you saw walking Chase?
Yes.
Wearing the pink shirt?
Yes.
And did you see Courtney when you arrived?
No, not at first.
Okay.
I looked up toward the apartment door, and Courtney was walking toward me.
Okay.
And she took a couple steps, and she stopped at the top of the steps.
And did you have any conversation with Courtney?
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell us about that conversation?
I didn't even say hi. I just said, "Where's your dad?" And she said, "I don't know." And I said, "Can I go look inside?" And she said, "Yeah, sure." And she kind of stepped to the side, and I walked past her.
Okay. Did you go inside?
I walked up to the door. I opened the screen door, and I went to open the door to the apartment, and it was locked.
Okay.
And
what did you do when you found it was locked?
Well, I didn't have a key or anything, and so I turned around to go back and ask Courtney if she had a key so that I could get in.
Were you able to ask Courtney?
She was gone.
I really think her actions with Elaine, when Elaine showed up there, spoke volumes. you know, them mysteriously disappearing after saying, yeah, go in there and see for yourself, you know. She just disappeared.
The next witness is Guy Gray. Now, he's the first responding officer from the Altamont Springs Police Department and the first one to enter the apartment looking for Stephen Schulhoff.
We went towards the, I guess it's north side of the residence, which there's 2 bedrooms located.
And it's really through his eyes that the jury gets to see this incredibly brutal crime scene and see the sheer brutality of this crime.
Are you still calling out, Steve, are you in here?
Yes.
Then what? That's good.
Entered into the second bedroom, and as soon as I walked in the bedroom door to the right, I saw a set of feet sticking up with the toes in the air.
The body was completely head first into the container, where all you saw were legs sticking out. Just to look at it, you didn't want to see the other half of the body. I mean, for whoever would do that, you know, ugh.
The prosecution's next witness, a bloodstain pattern analyst, would only further highlight the brutal nature of the killing. Based on the pattern of blood that literally covered the wall of the bedroom where his body had been found, the expert was able to roughly determine the number of blows that had killed Stephen Schulhoff.
When we look at those, if we draw lines through those bloodstains backwards through the long axis of those bloodstains on the north wall there towards the headboard, we look at roughly 3 different areas where they converge, sort of in the middle of the headboard, slightly to the right, slightly to the left. So we're looking at roughly, I'd say approximately 3 blows.
The next witness is Thomas Beaver, the chief medical examiner who performed Stephen Schulhoff's autopsy.
The injuries you observed on the victim, are they being consistent with being caused by this item?
Yes, sir.
His testimony, too, reinforced the evidence that Stephen was killed by a few powerful blows.
You can see that the skull is fractured. There's a displaced skull fracture here, a displaced skull fracture here. This fragment of bone is detached and partially depressed into the brain. There's also fracture going back to the back of the skull and along the base of the skull.
While the prosecution witnesses had shown the horrifying nature of Stephen's death, none of their testimonies supported the state's theory that Courtney was in any way involved. When we return, the jury hears from witnesses the prosecution says show that Courtney was the driving force behind her father's murder.
She asked me if the tape recorder was on, and I said no. And she said that there was more to it, that she wanted to tell me, but she didn't want to talk on tape.
A former ballerina charged in the death of her husband.
Said that she attacked her and she shot him.
She's claiming that he is the aggressor in all of this.
I see a liar. I see a manipulator. She killed my dad.
Will the jury see her actions as self-defense?
Boy, did she have every reason to fear him.
Or murder.
The Black Swan murder trial. Live coverage next week following jury selection on Court TV. Shattered skull fragments and blood-spattered walls had allowed forensic experts to meticulously reconstruct Stephen Schulhoff's brutal death. Yet their testimony did little to implicate Courtney in her father's death. With the prosecution's next witness, however, that was about to change.
Can you state your name for the record and spell your last name?
Yes, Ivan Friedman.
Ivan Friedman is a crucial witness because he claims he witnessed conversations between Courtney and Michael about killing Courtney's father.
Can you tell us what Courtney said in reference to her father?
That she didn't like living with him. She couldn't get along with him. She was angry at him a lot. And that she just wasn't able to get along with him because she wasn't able to see Michael.
Did she ever describe that she hated her father?
Yes.
Did Michael ever make any statements in reference to her complaints concerning her father?
Yes, he did.
Okay. Can you tell us about what he said?
About digging up a gun that he had buried behind his father's house.
And what was he going to do with that gun? Did he say?
At one time, he said he was going to kill Courtney's father.
What was Courtney's reaction to her boyfriend saying that he was going to kill her father?
The 2 times, it was at the suburban lodge. She was basically just laying on the bed watching TV. Her response was a giggle, a laugh. No, don't do that, nothing like that. It was just a giggle.
But the testimony of Friedman would pale in comparison to the next 2 witnesses, the detectives who first interviewed Courtney. Detective Robert Fetty testified first.
Did you come in contact with someone later known to you as Courtney Schulhoff?
I did.
Did you talk to her on tape?
I did.
And did she know that the conversation was being tape recorded?
Yes.
It was during this recorded interview that Courtney told police that it had been Michael's idea to kill her father and that she'd tried to stop him.
During the conversation with her, I realized that she had had contact with one of the other detectives who happened to be there. At the conclusion of the initial interview, the initial taped interview, I turned her over to him.
And who was that?
Detective James Egan.
Courtney's lawyers had fought long and hard to keep Detective Egan from giving the testimony he was about to give. But it was a battle that they had lost.
Detective Egan is so crucial to the prosecution's case, not because of what happened during the tape-recorded interview, but because of what he says happened after he turned the tape recorder off.
During the booking process, did something about the baseball bat come up?
Yes, sir.
And what was said about that?
She said that her fingerprints may be on the baseball bat.
And did you ask her about that?
I asked her why. And she told me that her and her dad played either softball or baseball, I can't remember, but they played ball, and that she had used that bat on many occasions.
Did she start telling you something about her participation in his death?
Yes, she did.
What did she tell you?
She asked me if the tape recorder was on, and I said no. And she said that there was more to it, that she wanted to tell me, but she didn't want to talk on tape.
What Courtney told Detective Egan when the recorder was off would much more closely match what Michael had confessed to the police.
What she told me was that she participated in the murder by taking the bat and putting it by her father's door.
Who was going to do the actual killing of the father?
From the way it was explained to me, Michael was.
Instead of leaving, Courtney told police she listened from outside her father's door after Michael went in.
And she was standing right by the window?
That's what she told me.
And what did she say she heard while she was standing there?
She said that she could hear the bat hitting her father.
And how did she describe the sound of the bat hitting her father?
I don't remember the exact words, but she described, like, she made a noise like the bat was hitting her father, and she did it about 3 times.
Did she indicate to you why she wanted to kill her father?
From what I understood from her, Michael needed a place to stay, and her father did not approve of Michael at all.
When we come back, the defense takes aim at the reliability of Courtney's alleged confession.
The evidence does not show any effort by Detective Fetty to write down anything that my client said to him when she repeated what she had supposedly told Mr. Egan. Not one note.
Next week,
we'll get you ready for the proceedings each day in the Black Swan murder trial. Plus, Friday, a voice for victims in the tragic case of Rachel Morin.
Opening statements with Julie Grant. Mornings at 8/7 Central on Court TV.
The prosecution was relying heavily on Courtney's alleged confession to convict her for being an accomplice to her father's murder. But the defense wanted to use that same confession to set her free.
Courtney Schulhoff came in there and she was crying because her father had been killed by Mr. Morin. She was in there with her mother, who was in shock. These are not the actions of a guilty person.
Courtney's defense attorneys, James Earl Figgett and Tim Cottle, were both very experienced defense attorneys in the Sanford area.
Well, you say, well, Mr. Cottle, are you suggesting to us the two law enforcement officers came into this courtroom and told something that wasn't the truth? You got to decide that.
The defense's strategy here is to really focus the jury on the tape-recorded part of Courtney's interview where she denies any involvement in this killing or planning of the killing.
It was a point they drove home by having Detective Fetty read from Courtney's original interview transcript.
If you don't mind, sir, could you read what she said on page 42, line 15 through 17?
Well, I say, okay, and she said he was sitting there, and he said, I have a plan, and I just asked him, I was like, what plan? And he's like, to get rid of the problem. And I didn't understand what he meant about that, about the problem. Then he went into detail about it, and I was just saying, I was like, don't do it, don't, I swear, please, don't do it. And then I told him, I was like, I'm going to call the cops. I'm going to call anybody if you do this. And he said, if you call the cops, then I'm going to kill you too.
And after you spoke with her at 7 in the evening, what happened with her? Where did she go?
That's when I put her with Detective Egan.
Okay.
He has his own separate office.
Okay. He has another office in a different location across the hall or down the hall or something?
Same bay, but in a different office.
Okay. And when she was speaking with Detective Egan, was her mother also present?
I don't think so.
Now, how is it that you all got her mother out of the interview process?
Well, you know, her daughter was in custody, and we said say goodbye, you know.
She's 16. She's a juvenile in a room with professional law enforcement officers, may not realize fully the implications of what she's saying.
Only when her mother leaves and Courtney is questioned alone by Detective Egan does she allegedly admit to helping murder her father, and no record of what she actually said exists.
Had the second conversation with this 14 to 16-year-old girl, and she asked you not to turn the tape recorder on.
That's correct.
The defense really goes hard at Detective James Egan when it comes to his interrogation tactics of Courtney Schulhoff.
You, as a 16-year-old girl, control whether or not you took any actions to record for posterity a statement that she made to you when she was a suspect in the death of her father, instead of taking her into a room where you could make absolutely sure that there would be a record that somebody would be able to actually watch.
Yes, sir. I let her talk.
I have nothing further.
The defense also tried to downplay the significance of Ivan Friedman's testimony.
I believe you mentioned that she never actually engaged him in conversation. She was lying on the bed watching television, and he'd say something like that, and she'd giggle. And that's all she ever said, isn't it? And even Mr. Morin, when he was speaking with you about digging this gun up, he said that jokingly. In fact, he said, ha, I'm kidding. Yes. Okay. Every one of the young people that you had occasion to be associated with at Jeremy's, at the Suburban Lodge, all had something negative to say about their parents, ma or pa. True or false? Not all. Okay, most of them did. Most did.
It took the prosecution and defense just a single day to present their arguments in the trial of Courtney Schulhoff. In their closing argument, the prosecution tried to portray Courtney as a cold-blooded killer who deserved to spend the rest of her life in prison.
Ivan Friedman, who has no interest in this case whatsoever, came forward and told you her response in front of him was giggles. Giggles of approval. You know, somebody's telling you you're going to kill your dad and shoot him in the head, and all you can do is giggle? Again, we're going to ask that you find the defendant guilty. Thank you.
But where the prosecution saw evil in Courtney's laugh, the defense saw a teenage girl acting like any other girl her age.
Her giggling is her sort of dismissively indicating, yeah, he's talking like that all the time. She didn't chime in. There was no plan in the summer and fall of 2003. The state reaches too far when they make a giggle into a conspiracy.
When we return, the jury determines Courtney's fate, and she addresses the judge in a surprising twist that just may spare her boyfriend, Michael Morin, from execution.
It was a game changer for us because here we have Michael Morin's co-defendant, Courtney Schulhoff, who was confessing to the crime.
A former ballerina charged in the death of her husband.
Said that she attacked her and she shot him.
She's claiming that he is the aggressor in all of this.
I see a liar. I see a manipulator. She killed my dad.
Will the jury see her actions as self-defense?
Boy, did she have every reason to fear him.
Or murder?
The Black Swan murder trial. Live coverage next week following jury selection on Court TV.
Courtney Schulhoff was facing life in prison after being accused of manipulating her boyfriend, Michael Morin, into brutally murdering her father. After just a single day of testimony, during which her lawyers called no witnesses, Courtney's life was now in the hands of the jury.
One day, and this girl's fate hangs in the balance. That's extraordinary. I mean, the speed of this trial is absolutely extraordinary. The jury got the case the morning of the second day, and it did not take long for them to come back with a verdict.
Publish the verdict, please.
David Morin versus Courtney Schulhoff. Verdict: we the jury find the defendant guilty of first degree premeditated murder. So say we all, death parting with foreperson.
Somewhat surprisingly, Courtney did not react when the verdict was read. And after the judge asked her if she'd like to make a statement before sentencing, she huddled with her lawyers for what seemed like an eternity. And Courtney surprises everyone by directly addressing the judge.
Your Honor, I would like to openly admit in court that Michael Morin is not the person who killed my father. I was. So I accept full responsibility, and I accept the verdict.
After Courtney's surprising, if improbable, admission to murder, Stephen Schulhoff's girlfriend, Elaine Bauk, took the stand with a message of her own.
Elaine Bauk. I guess all I really want to say is that I just didn't want anybody to forget about Steve. He was one of the most wonderful people I've ever met. And he deserves to be remembered. And just thank you, and just don't forget about Steve.
Thank you. All right, Ms. Schulhoff, it's the judgment of this court. She will be sentenced to prison, Department of Corrections, for your natural life without the possibility of parole.
Courtney's courtroom confession caught the media's attention, with many speculating on the impact her surprise admission of guilt might have in helping Michael Morin escape death by lethal injection.
Her statement post-verdict, what, if any, impact does it have on your pending case?
Well, the only real impact it has presently is that I'm under an ethical obligation to disclose it to Mr. Morin and his attorneys. And I've already done so by phone, and I will be doing it in writing, so there's a written record of it.
But at that point, when Courtney Schulhoff told the judge that she was solely responsible, that Michael Morin had nothing to do with it, that was a game changer for us.
Jeff Dowdy was Michael Morin's defense lawyer, and he had few illusions about his client's innocence.
Michael Morin's fingerprints were on the baseball bat. The blood and some DNA evidence that was on his T-shirt came back as Stephen Schulhoff's. Michael Morin's footprints were around the body. Taking all of that into consideration, coupled with his confession, the evidence was very strong that Michael Morin committed this.
But that's not what Courtney was now claiming. She wrote a letter to Michael's dad telling him,
I'm writing because I want to apologize for putting your son in this situation. He did not kill my dad. I did, but was scared when I got caught. I told the truth at my trial and plan to testify at his trial to declare his innocence.
Her story did not make any sense, but we had a legal obligation. You know, Michael Morin, let's put her forward. He wanted us to put her on the stand, and we did.
Michael Morin's trial for the murder of Stephen Schulhoff began here on April 24th, 2007, where he faced death if convicted. Courtney Schulhoff was one of the first witnesses.
She was dressed up as a petite child in her trial. She had nice conservative dresses on. When we did the Michael Morin's trial, Courtney's appearance changed 180 degrees. Besides, she was in her jail uniform, but she went what I guess would be characterized as gothic.
Courtney told the jury, everything I said the day I was arrested was a lie. I was the lone killer. She said she hated my father and that he had raped me. So while Michael Morin stood outside, she said she took an aluminum bat, snuck into her father's bedroom, and beat him to death.
It was just a far-fetched story. I don't think the jury bought it at all. But again, and we were facing a death penalty trial.
But as the jury retired to consider Michael's fate, the defense was cautiously optimistic they could avoid the death penalty, maybe even get a second-degree murder conviction.
We wanted to focus that she was the mastermind. She was the one that planned this, and he was going under her direction. So it wasn't first-degree premeditated murder. He was acting on her behalf. It was 50-50. In fact, Mr. Nielsen and myself, we felt pretty good, because after the debacle with Courtney, and we had argued all along that he was under, dominance of her, and after her clown show, so to speak, after her performance, we felt now the jurors can understand what this guy was dealing with.
Unfortunately for the defense, it was not to be.
When the jury came back to deliver its verdict, the result was not that surprising. For Michael Morin, the trial really began with a sentencing phase. This was the effort to save his life. And one of the most important witnesses in that endeavor was his dad. He had to be humanized before the jury.
His father was powerful testimony. His father testified how hard it was on Michael when his mom died, how he was a changed person.
In closing, the defense reminded the jury that Michael would never leave prison alive, and that while it ended in tragedy, Michael's initial intentions had been pure.
We were allowed to argue to tell the jurors that this is final. We're just asking you to spare his life, this young man's life, who came, to fall in love with this young girl. But for this young girl, falling in love with her, this probably never would have happened.
When we return, the jury determines Michael's fate and where Courtney is today.
Once the door closed to the deliberation room, it would be 5 excruciating long hours before they returned with a decision.
TV.
Courtney Schulhoff had testified in the murder trial of her former boyfriend, Michael Morin, in the hopes of saving him from the death penalty. Now, the jury had retired to determine if he should live or if he should die.
We were extremely nervous about what the jurors were going to do based upon just the atrociousness of the crime, the horrific crime scene, complete blood everywhere, the skull bashed in. We knew that we had a lot going for us in mitigation because he was a young kid, relatively crime-free, captain of the football team, loved his mom. We didn't know which way it was going to go, and the jurors were out quite some time.
Once the door closed to the deliberation room, it would be 5 excruciating long hours before they returned with a decision.
Michael Morin was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole.
And back then, it didn't have to be unanimous. It just had to be a majority. You know, we were very relieved that it was life in prison.
We reached out to Michael, who is currently serving his life sentence at the Mayo Correctional Institution in Lafayette County, Florida. While he declined to do an interview, he did say he appreciated the contact and told us, "I've been locked up now for 20 years and will never go home. No matter how much I've changed or learned in those years, it will not change my life sentence. My friends and my brothers are all grown up, and my dad is getting pretty old now. I'll be all alone soon in this place, so it's nice to hear from someone." Courtney Schulhoff was also sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole.
There is actually a glimmer of hope for Courtney Schulhoff. The Supreme Court of the United States in 2012 decided that for juveniles like Courtney, life in prison without the possibility of parole is actually cruel and unusual punishment. And she was resentenced with a possibility of parole, so she may actually get out at some point.
She's got 20 years in. She's going to probably be out, and with game time and everything, she's going to be out in 15 years. She's going to be 50 years old. You know, it's not relatively, not old by any means, or, you know, not young, but still, she's going to have a life after her. Michael Morin, even though he's only 4 years older, is never going to have that opportunity. He will die in prison.
Just a horrible tragedy that didn't need to happen and ruined so many lives. I think Courtney and Mike would have been really good people if they hadn't met each other and gone down that wrong path.
But while the tragic love story of Courtney Schulhoff and Michael Morin may capture the public's attention, it's also worth remembering the person whose life was cut cruelly short as a result.
Yeah, I just prepared a little statement. Steve Schulhoff was a friend to everyone he met. He never stopped smiling. He would give you his right arm if you only asked him. He didn't deserve what happened to him. He loved Courtney and only wanted her to lead a happy and productive life. On behalf of all those who loved Steve, justice was served, and we thank God for that. We are better human beings because we have known Steve Schulhoff.